really for me, what I want to see when I bring somebody in is I want to see the passion in those individuals' eyes. I want them to tell me why they became a PA, why they would be a great fit for the position, and convince me that they're the one that I would choose over any other, whether or not it's seasoned or a new grad itself.
Welcome everybody today. Very excited. Today we have with us Ryan Desgrange. Ryan is the Advanced Practice Provider Director for the Orthopedic Service Line at Henry Ford Health. So welcome today, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start out with your journey becoming a physician assistant. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had received my undergraduate degree from Eastern Michigan University, and I went there on a running scholarship and was a cross-country and track runner. After that, I graduated and I was running semi-professionally. And so actually, while trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon at the Chicago Marathon, I was running about 10 miles and put my foot in a sewer grate, rolled my ankle, fell down, and ran on it the rest of the way. Missed qualifying for the Olympic trials and ended up with a broken ankle out of it. And so at that point, my focus was all running. That's what I'm going to do my whole lifetime. And I said, you know what, I probably need to grow up and find something that's a little bit more sustainable. And certainly having an exercise physiology background, I knew I wanted to be somewhere in medicine. So within that time frame, I was working with a spinal cord injury rehabilitation program, and I was interested in physical therapy. It was actually the physical therapist who told me, Ryan, don't do physical therapy. There's this thing called PA. It's kind of like med school, but not as much time. And you're more of a generalist, so you really don't have to make a decision where you want to go. And so I actually had looked at it at that time frame and subsequently applied and went through the whole process of PA school and interviews and the stress that was there with the interviews, which I'm sure many of us can, appreciate. And it was at that time that I was newly married, and I actually started my PA program at Wayne State University 1 week after our honeymoon. So you can just imagine now the fire hose of information, all the time requirements. And, me and my wife at the time had moved into my in-laws' unfinished basement just to decrease costs and, the stress and everything like that. So that was my first initial jump into the PA profession. It was really a physical therapist who led me into that area. And so thankfully, I created some great working relationships with my fellow PA students, and I actually carpooled with 4 other women at the time, which, as a newly married guy, I'm sure there's some stress and some weirdness in there, but it made for a great conversation, great camaraderie, and we're still friends at this point here. At least during my PA learnings, it was a case where really I was overwhelmed with the amount of information that was there, as many people, can attest to. I didn't get involved in any PA program committees or anything like that. I just wanted to make it through. And actually, during my clinical rotations, I started to think I wanted to do emergency medicine. And so at our local hospital, a level 3 trauma center, actually the way that I ended up getting the position as a new grad, because typically in the ER, they want seasoned providers and such, is they gave me a call up. I think it was like at 8:00 at night. They're like, hey, Ryan, we're slammed. We were wondering if you can come up to the hospital. We have an intoxicated guy who fell down. He has a big gash on his head. Could you help us fix it up? And so I lived at that time 4 miles away from the hospital. So I actually put on my running clothes. I ran to the hospital, put on a surgical top and everything like that. And I stitched this guy's head up, ran back home. And, lo and behold, a couple of days later, they made me a job offer. And so it was really surreal and everything like that. I mean, I don't really run anymore. And so I had to kind of put those dreams, but I mean, I've done so much, within my professional career. I'm really excited that I chose the PA profession.
Wow. I love that story. I'm so glad I didn't know it before you just shared it now, because I really got to experience it firsthand. Really amazing, your struggle, and certainly your life didn't go down the path maybe you imagined, and through those course of events, you wound up, discovering the PA profession. I love it. I love it. So as a director for advanced practice providers, I am sure that you have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes that have come across your desk throughout the years. And so let's talk about and give some inside scoop about the resume and the interview process. Take us through that. When you're hiring for a position, and let's focus on that new grad, what are you looking for in resumes? What makes them stand out? And tell us a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit about the interview process through your eyes.
Sure. So, for me, my personal spin on things, and certainly I leave, unless there's some issue from one of my fellow physicians or the PA providers that are part of that team, really, I interview anybody. New grads, there's nobody off the table, because you never know if it's going to be a great fit and a great fit long term. And so for me, my personal preference is to screen every single individual that I can. I mean, yes, our recruiters do a great job as far as filtering and selecting things and everything, but I never know if I'm going to miss a diamond in the rough, so to say. So, when I go and I focus on, new grads and things of that nature as well, really for me, what I want to see when I bring somebody in is I want to see the passion in those individuals' eyes. I want them to tell me why they became a PA, why they would be a great fit for the position, and convince me that they're the one that I would choose over any other, whether or not it's seasoned or a new grad itself. And then I think ultimately it's really the ambition. I want them to see and almost think ahead of like how they can make an impact on that team. And so really, they're really marketing themselves. And for me personally, I love doing interviews. Yes, I love where I work, but interviews are a place to where you can talk about yourself and you can show the excitement. And that's where a new grad can really bring this out. I mean, this is their chance. And certainly when you look at, new graduates that are applying, and if they don't get the position, and certainly I have a lot of PA students where I'm at that ask me tips and tricks. I say, okay, well, maybe the job that you're applying for, because you need to get a new job because you have student loans, you got a house, you got a family. These interview things, whether or not you get the job or not, is great experience as far as learning about yourself, learning about what you want and everything like that. So I think that that's a great inside scoop as far as the interview process.
Amazing. So you're talking about having that energy and that passion, but what does it really look like? What is a candidate saying or doing in actuality that lets you know like they are excited to be there?
Yeah. So for me, it goes back even to the PA program. So when we're interviewing people for, their interest in wanting to be a part of a certain university, one of the key things we ask them is, well, what do you know about the university? So really getting to know, whether it's a private practice clinic or a big healthcare system, knowing what their core ideals are, I think is valuable, because you're investing in it. Because once again, us as a health system or an organization or a clinic are investing in that individual as well. So seeing that there is that reciprocal nature as far as wanting to know and understand and be a part of it, I think is key. Once again, going back to my previous point, also thinking beforehand, before even the interview, how can I make an impact on that? Where do I see myself? And certainly a lot of the things that I start to ask these new graduates is, a simple question: where do you see yourself in 5 years? Me as a director, how can I get you there? What's your long-term plan? Where do you want to go with this? I certainly know that a new grad that's applying to a position, within orthopedics itself, it may not be their love, and they're hoping to maybe get that first foot in the door into something else, but I'll try and make it very impactful and rewarding for them to help steer them in the right direction.
And for your health center, for your service line, how are decisions made through the interview process as to who you're going to hire and who you're going to pass on?
Yeah, so certainly, background is key. So, in the world of orthopedics, certainly if they have some experience in orthopedic, in first assisting, or even as an athletic trainer or exercise physiologist, we use that component there. Certainly, we do appreciate those individuals that were able to multitask during, high school and even into their PA program, because once again, the practice of medicine is multitasking. You're getting phone calls, you're having to enter orders, you're having to precept students and stuff like that. So really somebody that has on paper that ability that they've been able to juggle things effectively, I think is a key and a vital component. Now, when you look at who's involved, well, it may be the case to where this one PA is a part of or assisting multiple physicians or other PAs. So I will certainly involve those individuals. Now, of course, time is at a premium. So, here I am disrupting their clinical practice or their OR. So really, I kind of say, okay, here is the resumes. Tell me what you think. And I will do the pre-screening and I'll bring you back for, the secondary interview or the formal interview as well.
What do you think stands out? I know you said you'll send those resumes on to the physicians. What do you think stands out on a resume that might make a surgeon go, yeah, let's bring this person in?
Well, I think that a lot of people, and especially for a new grad, don't put a lot of thought into the cover letter. I think, your resume, especially for a new grad, everybody's pretty much cookie cutter for the most part. I mean, maybe they have some sort of volunteer services, maybe they wrote a paper or did a research project, whatever, but clinical rotations are clinical rotations, all cookie cutter. Now, granted, for me, in my world, if I can see that they did electives in a certain area of surgery or orthopedics, certainly that's going to capture my eye because a lot of these physicians and PAs may know those individuals. And there we can kind of go offline and have some discussions with those individuals that precepted those students or those candidates.
You spoke about the resume, sure, but then you were also mentioning a great cover letter. What makes a great cover letter in your eyes?
So telling a story. So it's very similar, Deborah, as far as your intro into this podcast series with myself was asking my journey. So really in a short phrase, just say, I chose the PA profession. Your job is a job that I want to pursue. Here's the things that I'm looking at, achieving it through here. Here's how I can see myself a part of that. And this is why you need to choose me. So really it's, like I said, marketing yourself, selling yourself, even though many of us don't have a sales background.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. What are some of the great questions that you've had folks interviewing ask you? What questions are good questions to ask during the interview process?
Yeah. So some of the questions that candidates ask me are obviously, what's the onboarding or the orientation process? I know certainly for me, and I've said this to, many of my candidates, where I live and where I work is 55 miles away, one way. I drive there most of the time every single day during the week. And, I've been doing that for over 6 years. And so I kind of use that as my selling point as far as, hey, I love where I work and I'm willing to make that drive and everything. But that being said, my first day on the job itself was, well, how am I going to learn the process? Who do I follow? And really it was, their response was, well, just follow the residents around in our teaching institute. So I'm like, okay. I met some of the PAs and the MPs down there. And what did they say? Oh, we didn't know that they hired somebody. So once again, right then and there, I was like, this is a really bad orientation system. Like nobody knows that I was onboarded. Nobody knows anything whatsoever. So how can I make this different? And certainly for me, that's where it led into a PA leader, a manager, a supervisor position to help with that onboarding, that orientation process. So I think one of the key things is for that PA candidate is for them to ask those questions. What's the onboarding process? What's the expectations? How do you see based off of my resume, how I could fit into your puzzle piece, your open area? I think that that's like a vital question always to ask. The other thing that I think would be, is there room for growth or leadership? So already there, you're already thinking, hey, once I get this fine-tuned, once I understand this health system or this clinic, how can I help you guys grow? How can I help myself grow? And I think that's a great thing. I think one of the other things that I think of is, what's the environment for PAs? Certainly we hear stories like, hey, the physician's really hard. Hey, we lost a bunch of people. So that leads the question into, well, what's the turnover rate? If you're able to give that sort of information, is this a new position or is it a replacement position? If it was a replacement position, why did that person leave? Was it voluntarily? Can they disclose that? And what sort of environment am I going to be walking myself into? I think that those are probably some of the more key items. Once again, it's really that person giving the impression that they're really invested and they're really interested in knowing more about that organization.
I love all those questions, but I particularly love that last question, which is really understanding why the position's open. And I think a lot of new grads would be afraid to ask that question, to be honest. That they think that might be something that they feel is like taboo, or that's something that they shouldn't be asking. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Ryan, what is the toughest question that you ask on an interview?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I always throw it back at them. I asked them right off the bat, tell me, why do you think you'd be a perfect fit for this position? Why would I consider you over another candidate? Granted, they don't know the candidates that they're up against, but I want them to be able to sell themselves. I want them to be able to look at themselves inwardly and tell me why they're going to be a great candidate. And I'm hoping that they took time aside, at home, where not they have to rehearse this stuff in the mirror or have their spouse or significant other ask them questions. But that's probably one of the bigger things. Outside of that, I asked them, what do they know about this practice or this health system? Because I want them to know and understand the key ideas and, strategic planning and the vision of the health system as well. Of course, I asked those standard questions, have you ever disagreed on the care of a patient with a physician, and kind of ask them, well, what was the outcome? What did that look like? I asked them, what people do you have problems interacting with as well? Because I want to know, are there people that are on my current team that maybe they may not mesh with? And if I bring them in, is this something that I need to be cognizant? So that not only helps me, but also helps that candidate as well. And then I think, I also ask if they have a current job, what's the best, what's the worst thing about the job? Because I really want to see, can they constructively think without throwing their current job under the bus of, why they're looking at leaving? Maybe it's just something that, it's a schedule thing, or maybe their life's changed, or maybe this is their ideal job that they've finally been waiting for and they got a foot in the door. And then finally, I asked, what's their involvement in, the PA professional societies and everything like that. Have they ever lectured or anything of that nature? Would they be willing to precept? Because certainly for me, I'm big on education. Certainly there's, a lack of rotations for students, as well as more PA programs, come to fruition and come on out. Like, I want to be able to combat that. And I want to make sure that they're on that team, because that's the ideal person that I want. It's once again, about giving back, because at one point these PAs were students and they need to rely on these preceptors to bring them in.
Those are all really amazing questions. What's kind of going through my mind is one of the first couple of things you brought up were being able to sell yourself and knowing why you're there. And you would, for those of us that are experienced interviewing or that have been involved in a lot of hiring, that's obvious. But I think that's great information for a new grad, because you said that was the first thing you said, that those were your toughest questions, but those are things that those new grads should really be thinking of and be well prepared. That's where you could really knock it out of the park, because you're not coming in with years of experience, but you should know why you're there, and you should know what you're bringing to the organization and why you want to be at that particular hospital or practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think just in general, the human nature, certainly here in the US, is we're go, go, go. It's really hard to get us to stop and take a touch point and be like, why am I doing this? And certainly I think it's very vital when you're under a significant amount of stress to stop and just talk to yourself and ask, why am I doing this? Why did I go into the PA profession? Why do I want to do what I want to do? And I think you should ask those same questions before every job, no matter how different it is. I mean, it could be urology, it could be ER. If you're applying to a multitude of jobs, you have to make sure that you have a very well-rehearsed idea and thought process when you get in and have that interview as well.
Great information. We talked a lot about things that they should be doing or can be asking, but let's talk about some red flags that might come up during an interview process. What are things that you see candidates doing that, kind of make you either, be cautious, proceed with caution, or even put the brakes on? What are those red flags?
Yeah. So, I mean, as with anything, for me, I'm always about promptness. I mean, I'd rather be 15 minutes ahead of time than beforehand. So that shows me preparedness, because I think it directly translates as far as their work behavior. Is this somebody that I'm going to be concerned with coming in on time? Like, you've had all this time, maybe a month ahead of time that we scheduled this meeting. Certainly you can clear your schedule and make sure that you're able to handle this interview. And that's what I tell individuals as well. it's a case where make sure that you have enough time even after our scheduled interview, because maybe I want to take you on a tour. Maybe I'm that excited about you that I want to sit there and have you meet everybody, my front desk staff, everybody. So I think clearing your schedule, giving yourself another hour even after the interview timeframe, I think is vital. But I think first of all, that's your first impression is this person on time? Especially as a director, to where I live by a calendar, I got to make sure that I'm following, that hour timeframe that I may have with that PA candidate.
So
with that though, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, so what are you thinking when the interview's at 10 and 10:02, you're sitting there waiting?
So for me, I'm like thinking to myself, what's their excuse? Granted, I think where I'm at, parking is horrendous, right? Very few people come to Detroit at sometimes, and this may be their first time. So trying to navigate where the parking and everything. So I try and always err on the side of them that maybe they're just having some difficulties. But at the same time, everybody has cell phones. They can send me a quick text like, hey, Ryan, I'm having problems navigating. But that's always the first thing. If to your point, if it's at 10 o'clock and it's 10:02 and I haven't heard from them, I'm waiting to hear what's this excuse going to be, because ultimately they need to be there 5, 10, 15 minutes beforehand. Let me be the inconvenience of having to go down, meet them later than what, they arrived at.
Fantastic. So I'm sorry, you were starting to talk about some other kind of red flags that come up during the interview.
Yeah. So I think the choice of apparel is key. I think it's better to be overdressed than underdressed. And then certainly just making sure that your attire is appropriate. So making sure that your pants are properly hemmed, not when you sit down, they come up to your knees, for women, making sure it's not provocative or anything like that, because obviously that detracts from things as well. Making sure that there's not food stains on your suit jacket or anything of that nature, because certainly myself, I'm not only listening to what you're saying, but I'm also looking at the person itself, because ultimately when you're seeing the patient, that's going to reflect the organization. So if you're that person that does have stains on there, I'm going to think to myself, okay, they have that nice crisp white coat. Are they going to be okay with having all these marks and everything when they go and see the patient? Because you bet the patient's listening to them, but they're also looking at how they're presenting themselves, and it's a direct reflection on the organization.
I have a feeling that you have a couple of war stories yourself of maybe interviewing some of the candidates you just described.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had one individual, who had to excuse themselves and they needed to use the restroom break and, get a drink of water. And when they came back in, they had a piece of toilet paper attached to the back of their shoe. And so they're walking in and we're going on this review, and I didn't have the heart to say, hey, just so you know, you have something in the back of your shoe. Because how do you approach that? You don't want to make them feel embarrassed or whatever. So I think it's always when you have to remove yourself in this situation, also checking to make sure, did I zip up my zipper? Am I trailing anything? Are my shoes sticking for some reason? Did I step in something? So, I mean, that was, one of the examples that I've seen where just like, probably could have done that, a little bit differently. Or it's the case to where, once again, somebody had a stain on the side of their shirt that they just didn't see. So I think, that morning of just and even the night before, just getting out what you're going to wear and just do a once over a 360 view to make sure, everything looks great. And once again, there's no harm in buying brand new stuff and just making sure it fits.
Agreed. Any other red flags that you've come across in your years, things that, something that happens or develops during the process that makes you go, maybe this is not going to be the right match for us?
Yeah, I think shaming, if it's a current job that they have, if they're shaming their organization, their practice, it sets a bad taste in my mouth. Is this somebody that, say the going gets tough, in their job position with me? Are they going to be one of those people that I'm going to worry about that's going to be toxic to the culture, that's going to somehow infect thought and create negativity? So yes, I want them to bring up, maybe why they're leaving, but I don't want them to throw their organization under the bus. I also, with, my discussions, and certainly when it gets a little bit difficult and they get frustrated, I am a big proponent on people not being defensive or argumentative or anything like that. I mean, certainly it's the ability to step back and constructively think of how am I going to redirect things? How am I going to bring this up? Because ultimately us as care providers, we have those patients that are very, very difficult. And so if you already by nature in the interview process have that defensive or argumentative nature, it's not going to go down well when you're seeing those patients. So I think that that's, a very easy red flag for me. That's a checkbox and saying, nope, this person isn't right for our organization.
Right. Like a glimpse of what's to come.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit or a lot about different questions and things they could be asking during the interview to show that interest and passion. What are some other things that candidates could do during the process that give you kind of that green light? We want to know more about this person.
Yeah. So I think some of the green light items are probably one, showing emotion, getting excited. I want to see them smile. I want to see them, at sometimes even under stress, the sweating and everything like that. Like I want them to be real. I want them to be raw with me. I think confidence in themselves is vital, and especially for new grads. Because I know we both know, both the candidates as well as myself know that it's going to be a very stressful component for them. This is perhaps their first professional job as well. So I know it's going to be crazy and stressful, but I want them to be excited. I want them to show emotion. I also want that individual to say, hey, when I ask a question, what's going to be the biggest hurdle based off of what I've discussed with this job? I want them to tell me where they're going to need help. I want them to know it's okay. This is a safe place to be able to ask for help. But then also I want them to also give examples on how they can help enhance our practice based off of that. So once again, I try and look at it as far as a way of making them integral into the practice, but also create an environment where they feel comfortable coming into it to ask questions. It's okay to make mistakes, especially for a new grad, but we have this great mentoring process to make you feel comfortable as well. And then ultimately, I think one of the things for candidates to think, towards the tail end of the interview of obviously, what's the follow-up going to be and what they can expect, because, I don't want to be badgered with phone calls, text messages, emails. Have you made a decision yet? Is there anything else you need from me? It's really just saying, hey, if I'm not selected for this position, would you be interested and willing in keeping my resume and keep me as far as the thought process for a future position as well? So I think ultimately it shows humility that, yeah, I'm a new grad, or maybe I'm not the ideal fit. And if I'm not selected, can you keep me in mind? So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind for the candidate.
I think that's awesome advice. I want to back up a little bit and go a little bit deeper in something that you mentioned, and it's the word confidence. And so you could come into an interview and express confidence, but there's a line between confidence and cocky. And where do you draw? What does that look like? The candidate who's appropriately confident and not overly confident.
Yeah. So looking at somebody who is confident, I think that they show this relaxed persona. They aren't, yes, we're taught to, our fingers folded, and I think it's good. I think but it can also come off defensive when you have, your arms crossed like this and everything like that. And they tell us this when we're interacting with patients and such. But really, I think the person that shows confidence, has excitement in their voice, has the passion in their eyes, versus somebody that may come off a little bit arrogant or cocky, is really highlighting how much better they are than other individuals. So I think the confident person is looking and saying, here, I can help exemplify my colleagues and build them up, versus, hey, this is just me and only me, and here's what I bring to the table, and I'm so much better than everybody else. I think that that's what sets apart, because once again, the practice of medicine, especially for PAs, is a team-based approach, not only from the physician and fellow PAs and maybe nurse practitioners, but also the administrative and support staff as well.
All right. So let's chat about the next phase in the interview and hiring process. We've already spoken about resumes and the process and questions, and you've made a decision on that great candidate that you want to make an offer to. Should a new graduate look to negotiate an offer?
So in my opinion, and experience as well, I think negotiating is getting less and less. In my experience, private practice, I think you have more ability, but when you get into the bigger hospital systems, a lot of them have gotten away from the negotiating component where, based on years of experience or years out of PA school, really there's no wiggle room, and especially for a new grad. I think probably recruiting and the HR system probably know that as well. So most things are really set in stone, but I think at the same time, you can also look and see, well, what other things, if you are a prime candidate, can they offer, So is it the case to where, They can have different benefits such as CME days. Is there coverage for conferences and things like that? Could they alter how many days a week you work as well? So I think maybe getting a little bit creative from that negotiation standpoint, and maybe not so much that financial component as far as the salary or hourly rate.
Great advice. Yes, that is what I find also in large hospital systems, that things are more structured in terms of that grid, new grad. This is our introductory kind of rate into the system. But I like that advice. Where else could you get creative? So maybe the new grad feels like they're getting a little bit more maybe coming in.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also, there's no harm in asking when you do get that offer, what does that look like as far as, how often do you have pay increases? How often do you do a market analysis on your PAs as well? Because it's kind of a way of understanding what to expect, so that after a year of practice, you don't see a pay increase, you're not let down. You're like, okay, well, in 2 years, they're going to reevaluate. I'll have 2 years into the organization. And yes, I'll be eligible for that pay increase. So I think that's huge to kind of understand that HR component as well.
To understand expectations going in.
Yep.
Right. So you've gotten through the offer phase. You have an accepted offer. That great candidate that you fell in love with makes it through the credentialing process. And now you're bringing them on board. And they've arrived at your doorstep the first day. That honeymoon phase starts. What shouldn't that new hire be doing in those first couple of critical days and months when they become part of your organization?
What they shouldn't be doing?
What they should not be doing.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that's very most common, and I think a lot of us in the medical profession have a type A personality, is not admitting mistakes or not asking questions. Certainly for a new grad, it's a carry-on, right? Like, we have 1 year of clinical rotations that we're learning and trying to understand, but here you're practicing as a fully fledged licensed PA. Medicine is ongoing as far as the knowledge base and everything like that. So I think it's up to that mentor, that director, or whoever that supervisor is to give it an open feeling as far as, you can ask these questions, you can make mistakes, you can call me, you can text me. And so really setting that tone. So for me, a PA that does not feel comfortable with that, or if they're doing things that I'm unaware of, that's where you start to have issues and things like that. And that's where you start to get concerned about their practice. And is this something future that could be a litigation issue as well? So trying to nip some of those behaviors in the bud is key, and really setting that tone like, hey, this is a team-based approach. Let's have open communication, open dialogue. And really for the new grad, in my impression and opinion and, experience, is these individuals, these PAs, when you're able to knock down that wall between a supervisor and a new grad PA, they appreciate that. They're much more open. They're much more willing. They're much more thankful for that experience.
So we're talking about what not to do, and you're giving some great kind of overall thoughts about areas to avoid. But can you think of some stories of new hires that have come on board and specific examples of things that, man, they shouldn't have really done that, not getting off to a great start?
Yeah. So one of the things I also do is I completely appreciate the ambition. As I said previously on this podcast, I think those individuals looking to see how can they augment or enhance the organization is vital. But I think there's also a cautionary tale as far as getting involved in too much. Certainly I had one PA that I was aware of that got involved in their state organization. They ended up getting involved in their hospital committee, and then they had their job. And so for them, they were constantly letting me know how busy they were, but come to find out it's with things outside of what their work duties were. And so what happened eventually was they burn out, they quit, they couldn't handle it. They started making patient mistakes. They started getting to the point where they had less ability to kind of reflect on some of their experiences with the patients, to where all of a sudden they would get upset. They would get argumentative with the patients because they were burnt out. They had too many things. They put too much on their plate right away. So I think one of those cautionary tales is really kind of taking one step at a time. Once you fine tune that job and understand those job duties and understanding that stress level, and finding out how you can delegate if you're able to, or share some of those duties, then you can take that next step and take on maybe a committee involvement, a council involvement as well.
So not doing too much too fast.
Yeah. And for me, it's all about work-life balance. That's the one thing that I say is work hard when you're at work and work hard on your family or your personal life when you're at home, and keep those things separate. And that's all that I ask out of those individuals. And so certainly I'm a proponent on avoiding burnout. And so for those people that I can see have the ambition, and, I can look at their resume and see their involvement in multiple things and volunteer events, I also say, hey guys, let's just focus on this within the first 90 days, because most of the time that's the time to where I could let them go. And let's focus on making sure you're doing everything right.
100%. So thinking about, things that they shouldn't do, what comes to mind for me is really maybe their interactions with the interdisciplinary team, right? Because it's the PA, the surgeon, but there's lots of other disciplines that are involved that make up that care team. So any words of caution, things that they shouldn't be doing as it relates to becoming a new member of the team?
I think probably the big thing is, really overselling themselves at that point. I think it's a case where people want to know about them, but I think it's given your background and knowing that you've already got your foot in the door, you're already part of the team, and not taking it to the next step. Especially it's the case to where, that can come off as threatening, somebody who's over ambitious. Certainly we know that there's different personalities, there's different work ethics. And so I think really kind of stepping back and getting an impression of what your work team is, and kind of, who can I go and talk to this way? How can I interact with people this way? I think is vital, is really knowing yourself and as well as knowing your team.
What does overly ambitious look like?
Right. So for me, I can say from my own personal experience. So when I left the emergency room and I decided to go into orthopedics, I was blessed. I loved it. I mean, for me, orthopedics, as being originally a fine arts major, it's an art form, right? You come in with a deformed forearm and you're like, oh my gosh, how can I make this look perfect? And you reduce it. You put it in a splint, you put it in a cast, and it looks beautiful when you see it on those post-reduction x-rays. Well, at that time in my institution, I was one of 8 PAs. So in the case where we had a pediatric patient with a both bone forearm fracture, 6 of us would go down there to do the reduction, do the splinting, do the casting. And for me, I was like, hey, I'm here to learn. I want to do this all myself. And I literally said, I want to move to midnights. I want to do 24 and 36-hour shifts. And I want to be able to do it all myself. Well, that came off as, rather threatening and everything like that. Like Ryan doesn't want to be a team player. But for me, it was the way that I had come off, saying I don't need anybody. I can figure this stuff out. When in actuality, I am a team player. I just wanted to be able to learn. It was so how I articulated those things, how I interacted with people, I think was vital. And then I think ultimately it's the case of not being braggadocious. I mean, certainly all of us have different ambitions. Maybe we have the time to go into research things. Maybe we have time to lecture and do research projects. But I think trying to avoid throwing it in other individuals' faces and everything like that, I think that's probably vital as well, as far as not being or coming off-putting to people.
Ryan, thank you for using yourself as an example and answer to my question, because the reality is, you've risen the ranks and you are in a very high level leadership position at this point. But that doesn't mean for our new grads that are watching this that you didn't have stumbles or missteps along the way. And so I think that was really, thank you for using yourself as an example of what not to do.
Yeah. I mean, for me, even when I got into a leader position, one thing that still sticks with me to this day that I did a horrible job on, and this is why I think for any leader that's out there, let alone any new PA, is really get to know your leader and develop that camaraderie, that almost friendly feeling. Was I had this horrible habit. People would come up to me. They knew there was Ryan rushing around doing trauma stuff and trying to do leadership stuff and jumping on meetings. And, I was sweating in the white coat and scrubs. Is they would come up to me. They could see that I'm stressed out trying to do all this stuff. And they're like, hey, Ryan, can I sit down and talk to you? And what would I do? I would list off every single thing And it made them feel like they were devalued and everything like that. And so that was the one thing that I appreciated from that APP that was with me, is that they felt comfortable enough to tell me that. And so for me, yes, it was a learning experience, but it was also a positive, and it made me feel reinforced as far as I'm doing the right thing as a leader, that these people can tell me this and they feel okay with it, and they did it constructively. I'm doing my job. And so I think that's a valuable thing to have going forward, specifically as a leader.
Wonderful. Anything else that comes to mind? Things that new hire can do in their first couple of months that really reinforces with everybody that, like, we made a good choice.
Yeah, so I think it's really vital, and I try and do this in my own walks. Sometimes of craziness, is to stop everything and literally converse with people, front office desk staff, make them feel valued. Like, hey, Ryan talked to me. Like, this is great. I'm getting to know him. How are your kids? All that stuff there. You build that family feel, especially in these big hospital systems to where you're, a small fish in a big pond. I think that's key. And also, I think, even though historically, having a good orientation allows, a gentle transition into practice, providers who can, perfect an early schedule and then make themselves available to help other providers, support staff, or even patients goes a long way. So rooming them into the room because the MA staff is, overbooked or whatever like that. I think that helps and creates this team environment. I think this will ultimately play to the individual's benefit, certainly during the first 90 days of employment, where I'm looking at every single thing and saying, okay, Ryan, you have 90 days to decide if this is the right fit or not.
Ryan, you have given our viewers so much wonderful, really granular information and great examples today. So thank you. I have one last question for you. If I am a genie and I can bring you way back to the beginning of your career as a PA, what advice would you give yourself that would have made all the difference?
For me, I would say, and especially in my orthopedic walk, is you have to be very self-directed in your learning. I mean, yes, we have all these great tools, but we also need to use them. Specific example, which I still kind of do today when I practice clinically, was in the ER setting. If I would get an abnormal test or a result and I needed to call a specialist, literally I would give them a call, specifically in ortho, and I would start to read off whatever that radiologist report was. And I may or may not have even looked at the patient, or I may not even have looked at the images myself. And so that specialist would be like, well, Ryan, I could have read the report. Why are you reading it to me? What's going on there? Is it an open fracture? How is this patient's pain? What was their MPO status? So I think the one thing is, if you're going to contact a specialist, or certainly if you're going to give a sign out or a handoff, know all the specifics, see the patient. And I think that pays off dividends in the end, and certainly helps keep you from avoiding, litigation pitfalls, and certainly, defaming your name and saying, hey, Ryan really doesn't know what he's doing, and he's relying on just tests and labs to make his decisions, rather than actually honing his skills from his PA practice and his learning and applying that to patient care.
Fantastic. So, Ryan, I wanted to just thank you again for the invaluable amount of information that you've provided our viewers today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. Thank you again for having me on here.